The Australian poet Robert Gray died today. I think it's the 19th of November 2025. I always loved his works. He came from around northern New South Wales, around Port Macquarie, I think, maybe Byron Bay. I heard of him working at bookshops in Sydney. I never met him, but I enjoyed his work, incredibly good. And the way he would talk about poetry, his preferences for simile over metaphor. He was a dedicated poet, and this is a poem I thought I'd read from an earlier book of his called The Piano. It's in his collected works. This collected works was selected poems was made in the 1990, so there was more selected works after this, and lots of his poems about the drama of his mother and father and growing up quite poor in that area. And then he put out a autobiography after they died, like many people do, called the Country I Came Through Last, and it kind of grounded a lot of his work. And before that, it was for me more powerful, but I did enjoy his autobiography. So I'm a lucky person to have been alive at the time of such a great writer, and to have experienced his work being tossed into the air, and then he himself bringing it to ground in his autobiography, which earthed a lot of the stories he had in his poems. His poems about his father are incredible, and a late one about his mother in a nursing home is so touching, so brutal. This is an earlier one called A Garden Shed. From 10 to 13, I was often sent for a month or even more at a time to my grandmother's in a distant town after grandfather died. It was thought I should go, though she hardly spoke. I read by the stove. She would pause in sewing sometimes, and you'd see she was out billowing about or crouching beside doors along the night, pushing at some. I kept a watch. But after school I used to wander in the scrub behind that big verandaed, shabby, dislocated bungalow, beyond her call and the other straggling houses at the town's edge. And I saw how once in the country the train began wildly careering, with its horn braying out again and again. When I arrived first, rain appeared, long slashes on a carriage window that broke up those trajectories, so the heavy glass, it seemed, was chipped at, but slowly, too slowly for escape. I remember the clattering of a tocsin, the railway crossing that we burst right through, a clown and hoop. And I was driven on, landed, lips stretched, on my feet. It must have been the ache at her house was the boredom, since it was never really so good being at home. But the mountains between, above small town dairy farm smoke, were a kingfisher blue, and their glint coming from night was sad like a sail that passes by. Strange you don't complain at that age. I had the inarticulate endurance children have, or some have. Grandma died of her strokes completely mad. I'd only liked there when allowed a key to grandfather's shed, just so's to look. At the end of the long rubbishy yard past lumber on trestles, the chicken run of oil-black earth and wire netting, the tatty eucalypts with their clothesline all in a high stockade of palings, I let myself in. There I'd rediscover each chisel, peculiar saws, the claw and ball peen hammers, his screwdrivers, brace and bits, punches, spanners, and a regal African paint brush array, stood on shakily done shadow boards, things spiky, knobbed, sharp or frayed like those raced among, beyond the fence, out in the heath. I'd handle these, but it would have been sacrilege for me to think them usable. It was there I was betrayed, my family would say. All of that was carefully hung, sharp and oiled in the gloom again, with glints, strange, like creatures in, were it possible, a deep-sea aquarium. And I found beneath the workbench sawdust still adrift in a spider's web. There was an old sofa, brown bleached as though a rose petal in a book, and stacks of beveled collected timber slung overhead. How curious those differing lengths. Each had a meaning, I felt, like poetry, shapes to be read someday in our maroon leather Milton. Grimy light in there made it look always a rainy afternoon. In the quiet I could hear the neighbours' hens creak just outside, or washing flap, or a car somewhere changing gear. And I've always wanted to live again at the level where one lived when looking at or listening to those things. In the immense presence of that wordless questioning, I seemed to be lying alone out on a hill slope, until I could hear coming through things cast up about there, a far roaring of their endless sea. In the secret noise of such turmoil and spray, I was somehow looking back, or being looked through, about to be lost, to my grandfather and I, who were only bubbles of a moment amid this whirling away. I first recognized the frankness of nature's appropriations there, that it's all effectiveness, inter-response, all mutuality and possibilities. Just things happening amongst themselves, things creating each other, and we are only the expressions of circumstances, of its tensions. Nothing belongs to any separate thing. It was there I began to understand. The less we think we are, the more we bear. And someone who sees he is nothing lightly will bear it all. R.I.P. Robert Gray, Gray.